Well, hello there, terrible warriors. Welcome back. I'm Justin Eacock, and we're doing another spotlight interview on one of the wonderful podcasts you can go out there and listen to right now. As you know, we're taking a break right now from doing actual play content because it's a little hard to get everyone together in the room when we're all supposed to be staying apart. And the next interview that I get to present with you is actually an interview I wanted to do way back in 2019 when I first met him at Gen Con. You might remember I was volunteering with Magpie Games, and they invited me to come and sit at the ENnie Awards and hang around. I mean, anyone could go, the tickets were free. And when I arrived, I quickly met up with a small group of Torontonians who were also there. And sitting right behind me in his Raptors jersey was Daniel Kwan. And immediately I knew that whenever I had an opportunity to work with him, I wanted to work with him. He has that kind of energy and excitement. As soon as you meet him, you just want to immediately say yes to whatever crazy idea he's got coming up. You've already heard him on The Terrible Warriors. He was here with his Kickstarter special for Ross Rifles. And Ross Rifles that Kickstarter is long done and successful, and the game is available. You can go out and get it right now, and I highly recommend that you do. He's also the co-founder of Dundas West Games. He's just now got a mystery with Dungeons & Dragons in Candlekeep Mysteries, which you can go out and play. His name is on it. It's very cool. And he's also the co-founder of the ENnie Award-winning Asians Represent. Asians Represent is a show all about elevating Asian representation in tabletop gaming. And on that podcast, they also produce Dungeons and Asians, an actual play production using characters of their own creation, classes of their own creation, and a setting of their own invention. So, obviously, Daniel and I had a lot to cover in just 1 hour. But I so rarely get an opportunity to talk to Daniel about Daniel. Almost every other time, we're talking about a project he's involved in, and he doesn't want the spotlight to be on him. He wants it to be on the work that he's doing. So right out of the gate, before we started breaking down all those projects, I just needed to know, what got you started in tabletop?
Yeah, I don't know if I talked about that last time I was on your show, because we were talking about Ross Rifles, and my co-author Patrick and I were there. And I mean, for me, I started TTRPGs and everything TTRPG related when I was a teacher. I played my first TTRPG when I was 10, 11 years old at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And then I ended up becoming, a grad student at the museum, doing my research there, but also teaching children's programs there and doing, content creation for them. Just so much. One of my jobs was actually, shooting macro video of arachnids killing things. So arachnids killing things really close up. And I was teaching this D&D program for kids there for, 8 years. And
wow.
I think I must have taught easily over 1,000 teenagers how to play TTRPGs. And I actually, through that program, met an artist named Shell Khan, Portable City on Twitter. Shell is an artist, just comic books, but also works in the TTRPG space. And Shell kind of was like, hey, you should meet all these people. And, got me to my first sort of guest spot at a con, talking about my work at the museum, and kind of started introducing me to people.
Yeah, because that's so cool. Here's this person, they're running Dungeons and Dragons at the ROM. It's immediately the ROM is one of the most fantastical places to go if you're a kid, for your imagination and for all the dinosaur bones and all that. And
even if you're an adult,
and then as an adult, but it's got that nostalgic pull. And then you hear that someone's there playing D&D with the kids at the ROM, and you're going, that's perfect. I need to speak to this genius right now.
Yeah, it was crazy because I went from meeting Shell, going to my first con, which was to speak at my first con. I'd been going to cons for a very long time, but to speak at my first con, breakout con, to 5 people, followed by being a guest at Fan Expo, which is, we're both in Toronto. It's the largest con in the city.
Breakout Con is a very small, intimate tabletop and board game convention. Super great, but it takes up a couple of rooms on the second floor of one hotel, and it's got it's gotten bigger over the years now, but it's still a very small intimate kind of
it's a grassroots.
It's
sort of
grassroots.
thing.
Yeah, it's the kind of place where you're going to see big name creators sitting around just having coffee at couches, and it's small enough that there's kind of a small town feel to that convention. When you go to Fan Expo, it's all of a sudden now you're in the big city, and it's there's 1,000 people, and everyone's anonymous, and it's all busy, and it covers everything. Like tabletop is such a small niche interest at Fan Expo compared to the comic books and the anime and the video games and the pro wrestling. And, and William Shatner's down there, and Stan Lee would come by all the time. And the tabletop is just a little room tucked away to the side, and even then, it's 10 times bigger than Breakout was. And so
100%. Yeah. So I went from like Breakout to Fan Expo.
Big pond, little fish.
And it was strange because I remember speaking at my first panel at Fan Expo, and at the table with me was Robin Laws, so local Toronto legend and legend in the RPG scene, and Ed Greenwood. And I'm just like, why am I even here? Like I'm just a teacher, and I'm doing a job that I did not think was special. Like I didn't think people thought that job was cool or anything like that. I didn't know anybody working in TTRPGs. And then things just kind of happened. Like I started working on Ross Rifles, and your audience kind of knows that story. And then from there I started doing cultural consulting, designing, and then Asians Represent happened. Asians Represent happened.
And that's actually where you and I first met. It was at Gen Con 2019. Exactly. I had met up with a few friends because I was volunteering with Magpie, and so I went with them to sit at the ENnie Awards and met a bunch of people that were also from Toronto that were sitting there.
And you and I bonded over the Swedish games.
The Swedish games, because the Free League people were like 2 rows in front of us, and we were just kind of fanning over them. And then beside me was the people that are now Dice Shame. The Dice Shame podcast didn't exist then, but it was people from the Invictus stream. And I had recognized a few other Torontonians through the Breakout Con. And so we all were sitting together, and you were there in your Raptors jersey right behind me. And
I was predicting all the ENnie wins.
That one's going to get silver. That one's going to get gold. That one's the silver one. That one's the gold. And bang, bang, bang. Every single one. I was like, oh my goodness, like 2020 Gen Con never happened, but I had plans to like the next year I'm coming by, I am going to have a little bookie game going because we are going to make money off of your predictions. And then we started chatting, and that's how that was actually my introduction to Asians Represent. And I heard about this. I'd seen the podcast being shared on Twitter by mutuals, and then got to meet you and your team, and we bonded over the Swedish games. And I think the deal is I'll run a game of Forbidden Lands for you. You'll run a game of Coriolis. You'll owe me a game of Coriolis, and then somehow we'll both come to fall in love with both of these games. And that offer still stands now. I'm running regular Forbidden Land games on virtual tabletop, and it's super dope. And then you were nominated that year in 2019, and then you won in 2020. Yeah,
we were nominated in 2019, and we won last year, which is crazy.
So tell me about the Asians Represent podcast. What is it? What are you out to do on the podcast? What do we expect when we tune in? And because you kind of you cover a lot of ground, where I know you play games, but you also do like critical readings and interviews and conversations. So introduce us to the Asians Represent podcast, the ENnie award-winning podcast of such a high caliber.
Yeah, this gold ENnie award-winning podcast. Look, we started Asians Represent.
This time next year, I'm going to be. Let me introduce you to New York Times bestseller Daniel Kwan. You know that, like it's just going to continue in this trajectory.
One can set goals, not dream. One can set goals.
I can say this. You don't. You. I know you're a humble person, and you don't. I know you. This is why you and I didn't talk about you at Ross Rifles. You seem to have a desire to share the spotlight and have the focus be on these interests that we have. And I know I'm putting you in the hot seat now. Where dang, the interview is on Daniel now.
I feel like it's something that I have to get used to at this point. And
now that you're a public figure.
Now that I'm I'm a public figure.
You're going to have a wiki page soon. You're going to be, are you verified on Twitter at this point?
No,
Okay,
no,
okay, that's
no.
coming
I don't even
soon.
know how. I don't know how that works.
I think
but
it's hand selected.
yeah, if that ever happens, I don't know what. Nothing. That literally nothing will change. But like, yeah, Asians Represent started off as a podcast where we talked monthly about. Yeah, monthly. Wow. We talked monthly about Asian themes in games. We interviewed Asian creators, talked about things like Orientalism, and how people can insert more positive Asian representation into their stories. And then it kind of evolved with as time went on. We started doing an actual play called Dungeons and Asians. It started off as a 5th edition D&D actual play, and then it kind of became Quest. We may go back to D&D, but right now D&D doesn't really do what we need it to do in terms of classes and mechanics, especially if we're going to take advantage of some online tools. And then, from the actual play, we went into, well, actually the actual play took off, and then, COVID hit, and we put the actual play on hold and started streaming on Twitch. We started a series called Asians Read, where we decided that we would read all of Oriental Adventures, the AD&D Oriental Adventures book. It took us 40 hours to read through the whole thing cover to cover. We did it with a whole bunch of guests. We critiqued the book. We said what was bad, said what was good. And then Asians Represent.
And you lit Twitter on fire.
And then we lit Twitter on fire. And I have been told and have seen on some parts of the internet that I am the guy that ruined D&D. Which I will one day hopefully have a plaque for. Daniel Kwan, the guy who ruined AD&D for all the white people. But we started doing that, and now we're reading Caricature, Alchemy. We have a weekly talk show called The Wrap Up that we stream live at Twitch and put on YouTube. In addition to doing the podcast and doing Dungeons and Asians, it's been like a really interesting journey, kind of adjusting to COVID and realizing that while we can put out this weekly content, we also have to take care of ourselves, kind of like you did with your stuff. It's just we shouldn't feel obligated to create this content, especially when right now everyone's just kind of focusing on surviving and taking care of ourselves.
Well, yeah, and especially podcasts are at their core passions. And if that passion isn't there for whatever reason, then you owe it to yourself and to your audience to not keep digging away at that, or you're just going to, it's just going to
ruin what you've created.
Yeah, you're just going to hate what you love. And there needs to be joy in what we're doing here. And that, it was just kind of coming to an acceptance that my energy level wasn't going to be at 100. It was going to be more capped out at 70. And so playing within that so that my circuit breakers weren't continuously flipping off and all my lights were going out, and figuring out that, okay, things have changed. The speed limit is different. What can I do now in these new boundaries that are, both physical but also mental and emotional that have been done. Mm-hmm. But this isn't about me. Asians Represent switches over to Twitch, and you're doing these critical readings of
I wouldn't say we
Oriental
switched to Twitch. We pivoted to multiple platforms. So it was kind of what it was, and in doing so, we grew our audience. Our audience blew up, and then we won an ENnie.
Yeah, then that happened.
We won an ENnie, and I think we're the first Asian people to ever win an ENnie for podcasting. I think I could pretty confidently say that based on what I've looked into. I think we're the first Asian people to ever win an ENnie for podcasting, and since then, we've just constantly tried to push what we're all about, and that's empowerment and education and entertainment.
And the ENnies are such a curious award. I remember in 2019,
the MTV Movie Awards.
Yeah, the reason you were able to predict who was going to win and who was going to lose is because it's based on votes, and it's based on fan bases. And many times at the ENnies, certain titles and publishers would be winning, not because they're better or award winning, but because they just have a bigger base. And certainly we've all been there, where you go to vote on some big page full of like Now Magazine doing their Toronto Awards, and you're not voting for all the restaurants that you go to. You vote for the one you go to, and you click on that. And so of course Chaosium wins every year, because Cthulhu. People are just going to click on it because of the brand identity, and so you get certain winners every single year at the ENnies that are just sure bets. So when things happen where a group like Forbidden Lands wins, or an event like Asians Represent wins podcast of the year, it also represents a kind of critical mass of support that has manifested against all of that very mainstream support that is sort of always there as white noise at the ENnies. And it's just so wonderful to see those crest out of like break the water level, because they're all there. I always say, like, at the ENnies, the nominations are what you want to look at, because even the ones that aren't necessarily winning gold and silver, those 5, there are gold games and gold content creators that are in there that don't win the gold or the silver because they don't have the fan base, but they make the nominations because I believe those parts are curated by judges. And so, you need to look at the whole list to notice some of those great indie titles that become sleeper hits and everyone loves, and they don't make it out. Like Magpie's there every year with stuff like Bluebeard's Bride that didn't win awards, and
it should have,
but it didn't. And I also understand, because it's got that, it's a niche. They don't have Warhammer numbers behind them voting for or Delta Green for best cover or things like that. Right? I pragmatically, I get it, and yet, despite that challenge that the ENnies just naturally have because of the format of how those awards are handed out, Asians Represent gold winner.
Yeah,
holy smokes!
So
what happened after that?
After the ENnies, we actually went and it's really funny. The day of the ENnies, I was doing a panel with a whole bunch of board game folks just about Kickstarter. And I had actually, during that panel, received an email from our designer, Will Parks, for Ross Rifles. And I opened up Ross Rifles in my email, seeing it laid out for the first time. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting emotional. Literally dipped right out of that panel into the ENnies live stream to see them be like, and the gold, and he goes to Asians Represent. Like, literally as I joined. And
you're mentally still playing catch up.
I'm mentally still catching up, and I'm like, wait, what the fuck is happening? And it just, our social media blew up, and, we were so grateful for everyone. Yeah. And then literally like a month later, we spoke at D&D Celebration, which was like a virtual con that Wizards had, kind of in place of D&D Live that didn't happen in 2020. Another thing that I didn't get to go to because of COVID.
Yeah.
And from there, we just continued to like put out new shows, try out new series, involve, more Asian creators on our productions. And then
that must have opened up like just networking opportunities alone, right?
Huge.
Like it exposed the existence of your show to a whole group of people that wouldn't have known about it. And not just listeners, but also people in the industry. How has that, have you noticed a shift in the feedback that you would have gotten from listeners, or the audience? Has that changed? Did you find you brought in a whole new group of people that were listening to you for the first time? What was that?
Yeah,
was there a before and after feel?
Definitely, because there were a whole bunch of people who were just like, I've been following you since day one on the podcast, and there's some people like, I love your YouTube channel. Do you have more? I'm like, yeah, we have a whole podcast. Yeah, we get people who just watch us every Friday on Twitch. They watch the VOD when it comes out on Monday on YouTube. And then we have people who literally watch and listen to everything we do.
Yeah, the 100% completionist.
And you know what? Like, I'm there for the people who watch on Fridays. I'm there for the people who watch on Mondays. I'm there for the people who watch and listen to everything. Because that's what we wanted to achieve with our content. We didn't want to make content that you would have to listen to every single one to stay on board. No, we wanted to create content that had something for everybody, right? we basically put out a panel every single Friday. Literally this week as of recording, we're going to be talking about horror games. This Friday, last week we talked about Candlekeep, and the week before we talked about romance and how to basically introduce more interpersonal relationships and role playing into your, more traditional games like D&D. But yeah, we have those panels. We have some like hard hitting, like just podcasts. We have one that's coming out. The next podcast episode is literally about Filipino cyberpunk.
Ooh.
And what that can look like. I'm currently editing it right now, and I'm just being blown away by it because I didn't conduct that interview, and it's really cool. And so for us, since the ENnie, since D&D Celebration, we've just been getting people who have been just coming to us from all of the different platforms that we're now on, and it's just been really cool. And right now, we've been focusing on, first and foremost, taking care of ourselves, right, in this time. B, growing our community, and particularly with Discord, we have a very, very engaged Discord server that we're currently working on.
You invited me into it, and I had to put it on mute because it was just notification, a million notifications.
Yeah,
and it's wonderful. It's a really, really active community, and I'm just old on the internet, and it just everything is overwhelming me.
Look, like when there are a whole bunch of other people who are like, hey, you want to join our Discord server? I'm like, I'm going to politely decline because I have a hard time maintaining the Asians Represent one.
I'll join the server and then I just kind of mute it and put it into a folder, and I'll check in when I want to swim in that pool. But it's not, it can only be active in one place.
I hate seeing those little red numbers.
Yeah,
I hate
it drives
seeing
me nuts.
those.
What do you mean? I got to go through my phone and get rid of all the little red push notification blisters. Get rid of them all.
Yeah, we made the Asians Represent Discord server. Now, we're currently planning, like a Patreon and a whole bunch of other things. But we're taking it real slow. We're taking it slow because we want to make sure we do everything right. Like, we registered Asians Represent Limited as a business in Canada. We've got a merch deal that we're working on with Heart of the Unicorn Productions. Cool. We're going to put a limited run of like prints and apparel. Really excited about that. Yeah. And then we're going to, and I think that's our 2021. Our 2021 is going to be merch and a Patreon. But we want to make sure we do everything right and we treat everyone who works with us right. Because first and foremost, we have to take care of each other.
Now, Dungeons and Asians.
Yeah.
Is that a separate podcast, or is that just a section within the Asians Represent podcast feed?
All on the same feed.
Okay.
Kept it nice and easy for everyone. We put it all on the same feed, just because it made sense from a logistical perspective to just put it all into one. That way, we catch our audience there. People who don't want to listen to that, we just skip that episode.
So the Asians Represent feed has like a number of sub shows that kind of filter through, whether it be interviews or actual plays or or conversations that go through. That
Yep.
You get little themes that change things up.
Yeah, there are three shows that are on the Asians Represent podcast feed. There's Asians Represent proper. There's the podcast. There's Dungeons and Asians, and then we have one Asians Read series there called Asians Read Caricature, and we're actually reading through and kind of providing our own humorous takes on how we would fix the AD&D Caricature campaign setting. Those three are the only things that are on the podcast feed right now. And then, of course, our YouTube channel has the Dungeons and Asians videos, which we're slowly putting out there. We have the wrap up, which is our weekly stream on Friday. We have the Asians Read Caricature videos go up there, and then we have a show called Critical Read, where our panel is reading through the
the show that killed Dungeons and Dragons.
The show that killed Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
No, there's. I think
I'm being mean, but yeah.
I think that it's Asians Read is the show that a lot of people think tried to kill Dungeons and Dragons, but then everybody just kind of blames it on me.
So we had James Mendez-Hose on. We talked to him when he was at Breakout, and he, I believe, has also been labeled as someone who has killed Dungeons and Dragons or ruined it, having conversations on orcs and racial representation, especially with evil characters, coded evil in Dungeons and Dragons, and the way they're handled, and having that conversation that needs to happen in Dungeons and Dragons, because they happened and they're there, and this game has been around for, what are we looking at now, almost 50 years, and it is embedded into every interview I have done on these spotlights when we're talking about indie games, and we're talking about anything else in this hobby, Dungeons and Dragons becomes the common code or the common language where you can use it to compare between these games, because I cannot assume that you know Powered by the Apocalypse, or I cannot assume that you know Forbidden Lands, but I can safely assume you know a bit about Dungeons and Dragons, and it becomes this problem when it's also a game that has also perpetuated so many systemic problems in representation and in well, I mean, I don't need to tell you about it, and yet we're still in it. Despite the criticism for the game, you've also got Candlekeep Mysteries. So it's not that there's a Dungeons and Dragons is broken, but it's not that it can't be corrected and brought into the 21st century and into a place where it actually would be welcoming and accepting and safe for all players to enjoy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, like, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I've been playing it for just over 2 decades. It is.
If it's not Dungeons and Dragons, it's a very close analog to Dungeons and Dragons that got everyone started in this hobby at the beginning, and
for the most part,
most part. I mean, maybe some I know got in through LARPing, doing vampire or werewolf, and it's one or the other, or it was Dungeons and Dragons, or it was war games, and which they all share this shared DNA. I wanted to ask about the actual play stuff. I wanted to know if you could introduce me to Dungeons and Asians. If we were to go through and listen to that, should we listen to the playlist? Can we jump in right now? What's that actual play? What's the teaser trailer for this setting? What are we getting ourselves into?
Yeah, so
when we go to join your story.
Our initial pitch was, you should start from the very beginning. Because we literally started with, okay, let's sit down, have a session 0, and let's try to make Asian characters. And we struggled real hard. And we ended up just like starting off being like, okay, well, we're going to make our own classes. And it became a lot of work. And we kind of talked about the sort of shortcomings of D&D's class system. But at its, base level, Dungeons and Asians is, an actual play series that, follows a whole bunch of very interesting characters as they travel through the land of Xia, which is our fantasy analog for Han Dynasty China. And so, it's this sort of leaning towards grim now, but it is this like high fantasy Chinese setting that's inspired by a very specific period in Chinese history. If you're an enthusiast of Chinese history, you know what happens after the Han Dynasty, which is the Three Kingdoms era, which is one of the bloodiest periods in China's history, which is where we're slowly getting to. But yeah, it's a fantasy actual play inspired by fantasy China. Right now we're making use of custom sort of classes or roles that are reflective of Chinese media, Chinese literature and historical sort of figures. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the pitch. Fantasy China, inspired by Chinese history.
And who are our characters, the adventurers in our story?
Yeah, so we have Dongfeng, who's played by Agatha, who you met. Dongfeng is a sky soldier. Dongfeng is basically a heavenly warrior who has been basically reincarnated as a anthropomorphic shrimp. We have Waleed, who's played by Amari Jazz. Waleed is from the land of Desh, which is our fantasy analog to the Indian subcontinent. And Waleed was like a stowaway on a ship, came to Xia and learns Chinese customs. So he is a South Asian coded character who has grown up in China. He grew up as a bandit, but became conscripted as part of an elite sort of task force led by our very own Steve Wynn's character, La Ning, who is a career soldier. But in terms of classes, we called Steve's character, a Yosha. Now, a Yosha is basically your equivalent to the European like knight errant or like adventurer, soldier of fortune. But in this case, it's more of like a folk hero, a warrior folk hero. It's kind of like your Japanese Ronin sort of equivalent, kind of a mix between your Robin Hood and your samurai. And that's your Yosha.
Cool.
And we actually, within the past 3 episodes, added a new player, Jade, who was an original member of Asians Represent, but Jade lives in the UK, so it was very hard for us to coordinate. And Jade's character is a Fangshi, who, is basically your occultist. Fangshi are essentially like magical specialists in historical China. The European analog could be like a magician, alchemist, necromancer, occultist, all in one. And so those are our characters. We have 4 main characters, and right now our story revolves around this massive piece of jade, which in Chinese culture is a symbol of like, purity, that has fallen from the heavens and is slowly turning all of the earth into stone, into jade.
Oh, dear.
Every blade of grass, every person, this slow-moving wave, this current touches.
And it's got the image, remember Reboot? When
oh my God, Reboot.
The little, I can't remember what it was some virus that hit mainframe and everything was turning to stone.
Exactly, very similar. And so our heroes are looking for these powerful flowers, which can imbue them with the power to basically stop this.
Cool. And so we're right in the middle. So if we're going to start, we should start where it began. And
start right at session 0.
Yeah.
Start right at session 0.
And follow along.
I wouldn't ever recommend to anybody to pick up an actual play kind of in the middle, because you miss all the little things, all the NPCs
even the one shot
show
games.
up.
Yeah, even the one shot shows where they change things up each week, because there's a Monster of the Week podcast out there that does something very similar to like just being one story that's self-contained, but there's still like inside jokes and threads and learning and the evolution of those characters and the players, if they're changing their characters up, that it's worth starting and following along so you can follow where those thoughts are. It's just going to sound weird when you jump in. You're not going to know why they're laughing some of the times. So we've got Asians Represent. We've got the actual play there in the middle, and we got your reads bit that you're doing. And meanwhile, you have you got Ross Rifles, which is awesome. You dropped the book off safely at my apartment. That was wonderful. Safely. And I've got that. I know way back there's Zany Zoo, which is also with Dundas West Games. And then you've had these contracts where you're now writing for these big deal games. Magpie just announced Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra RPG, and I understand you're part of this team of like, it's like getting together the X-Men and like all these names.
It's like the Asian Avengers of design.
And amazingly, I interviewed a lot of them because they were all at Breakout. I was like, oh, I know that person. I know that person. They're all my friends are in this game, and it's so cool. How did that happen for you, and how has that been like?
I could just say James basically messaged me and was like, hey Daniel, I'm doing this thing. You want to talk about it first? And I was like, cool, what is this? And he was like, we're gonna do Avatar, and I'm assembling Asian designers to work on this. And I said, cool, I'm in. And that was it. It's a great team. I think the game is, fantastic, and we'll be doing some
all that marketing
awesome
on the
stuff.
game itself is to be announced and will be coming out. But just the credits of the people that are involved in this game is just made my heart soar. It's very exciting to see. And then this week, you're in the midst of all of the press of Candlekeep Mysteries, and can you tell me a little more? You can probably tell me a little bit more about Candlekeep Mysteries, because that's available now. We can actually play it.
I could tell you all about Candlekeep Mysteries. Candlekeep Mysteries is an anthology of, I believe, 17 mystery-themed adventures set in the that start in Candlekeep. Candlekeep is this famed library in the world of D&D. It's this massive library fortress, and the map in the book is just super cool. And all the adventures there start at Candlekeep, involve a book of some sort, and then go on their own mysterious direction. I wrote an adventure called The
Makes me
Book
think of
Inner
Warehouse
Alchemy.
13. It's just something.
It's
something
yeah.
in there is triggering the mystery of the week.
That is a super Canadian reference. That is a super Canadian reference. If there are any,
there you go. No one else is going to understand what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they will not know Warehouse 13 because that was that's a Canadian television deep cut. It's like the X-Files, but not serious.
Yeah, but like for librarians.
Yeah, but for librarians. But then there's the show, The Librarians.
Yeah.
I think that's also a Canadian production.
Maybe, probably. I want to.
Who knows?
I don't know. Throw in others, with like Relic Hunter and other.
Relic Hunter, filmed in Toronto as well.
Toronto, yeah. My favorite filmed in Toronto show, Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future.
I don't know that one.
That's from the 80s. That's a hard deep cut. I think there's only like 6 episodes. It was a children's show set after the machine wars and humans lost. And Lord Dread rules the world. And Jonathan Power, the son of a scientist that built the power suits, it has put together a team together, and they're using his dad's old technology, and they can transform into the soldiers of the future, and he becomes Captain Power. And and the game also had a toy that you would shoot at the TV screen, like a light gun, like the NES duck hunt gun. And if you missed the target, there was a little man inside of like a plane that would eject when you would die, and the toy never worked, and it was terrible.
Of course,
it's like 87, 88. Like this the technology wasn't there. Oh my god!
Okay, so I just looked it up, and I definitely
you've definitely seen it on like YTV at like 3 a.m.
Yes,
and it was filmed in Liberty Village, entirely in Liberty Village before Liberty Village was Liberty Village, and they filmed the wasteland shots of tanks going over dirt because they needed a place with like rundown factory buildings. So they filmed it at.
That'd be old Liberty Village.
And Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future is also famous for the invention of the Steadicam, which is not just a Canadian, but a Toronto. It was first used on the sets of Captain Power. This stupid kids show that dealt with really heavy topics like PTSD and child soldiers and all kinds of stuff. And at its peak, every single production house in Toronto was working on that show. It was costing like Viacom or whoever was making it in the US something like $8 million an episode, which for a child show in the 80s is just stunningly irresponsible spending of money, and then it got canceled, and everyone moved on. But the Lord Dread, someone also pointed out, is likely it's the missing link between Darth Vader and Locutus in the Next Generation with the Borg. He looks like a complete crossover between that late 70s design of Darth Vader and then that early 90s design of Locutus. Lord Dread is the 80s missing link that brings those two things together in science fiction.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That's if I was doing a Toronto tour, that's what I would be mentioning as I was driving past Liberty Village. That would be my little tidbit.
This used to be a science fiction wasteland.
This used to be a sci-fi wasteland where the machines ruled over. It's also the show that had the very first entirely CGI character. And there were two of them, and they look like exactly what you would expect the world's first CGI television character in the late 80s to look like. But they were these like robot birds that worked for Lord Dread, and at one point one of them I think betrayed and joined up with the power team and was like, I cannot compute with this. I choose freedom, or something like that.
Old TV is great.
All of this is getting cut out because I do not need our interview to be derailed by my love of Captain Power. But
no, that's totally okay. But yeah, like back to Candlekeep.
So back to Candlekeep. So Candlekeep Mysteries, this famous library in D&D lore. That's where all our adventures begin. You find a book and it sends you off in a direction, or a mystery linked to something in the Candlekeep collection.
Yes. And so each of them is a self-contained one-shot or very short like 2 or 3 session adventure. Mine is a level 12 adventure called the Book of Inner Alchemy. And it's essentially you take your classic 70s and 80s Kung Fu movie and insert that right into the D&D world. And it's about this book and these monks of an order of questionable morality called the Order of the Immortal Lotus, basically come, kill a whole bunch of scholars, steal some very important pages from this ancient martial arts text that are required to make a very powerful magic item. And the players are tasked with tracking these people down and retrieving the pages and bringing them back for some loot, or taking that knowledge for themselves. It's really
I
up to
did
you.
see that there is the possibility of assembling those pages and learning the recipe to a very powerful relic.
It's a great item. It's one that I
don't want to spoil it in our interview, but I was like,
it's a cool monk item. It's a cool monk item. If I was the monk at the party and I was a character of course, like, flexible morality, I would definitely not return it myself, and I would take it for myself.
How has it been getting to write an adventure for Dungeons and Dragons? Like, actually, like you went from running D&D at the ROM for kids as an educational program to meeting people, to start a podcast that was once a month, to talk about this hobby and about representation in this hobby and these narratives that are being told without having an Asian person at the table to help tell those stories, all the way to winning an ENnie for that podcast, doing a critical reading on Oriental Adventures from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, to now writing a mystery in Candlekeep Adventures or Candlekeep Mysteries. That is a journey.
Yeah, it's honestly been it was crazy. It's kind of just like this wild ride that I've been on, and I have reached a point where I have achieved a childhood goal. My name and words are on a D&D adventure, an official D&D adventure, and I feel like it will do some good to the D&D world, the D&D community. And honestly, if this was the last thing I ever did for TTRPGs, I'd be happy. I approached this project with the assumption that I would never get another chance.
Yeah.
That I would never get another chance.
This was the shot. This was your shot.
I had one shot to do something good.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like write a good adventure. I had one shot to try to fix some of the issues that I saw with D&D. And there is no perfect TTRPG. But I had an opportunity to make some changes that would, not only make the game experience better for everybody, but also, fix, decades of, poor portrayals of my own culture. And so I had a chance to do that. And
is there one thing in this Alchemy mystery that you can, when you're talking about fixing, that you're particularly proud of, that's now part of Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh yeah, it's like 2 lines. Like I wrote like 7,500 words, and I'm really proud of like 50 words that I wrote. In the adventure, the Book of Inner Alchemy is basically, it's a martial arts manual, but it's also a manual on the inner workings of the body, specifically as it relates to chi, which in the game they call ki. And in the game, ki is something that like really only monks could use, and monks get ki points, and it lets them do all these really dope things.
Yeah. Which is also the case in games like Diablo, in that it becomes like a replacement for the mana pool.
Yeah, it's a replacement for the mana pool. It's a currency that lets you do cool things. But the thing is, in reality, like, chi is something that is, a core component. It's foundational to traditional Chinese medicine. It is an integral part of Chinese culture, and it is supposed to be in everybody. So I basically said, chi is in everyone. It has medicinal purposes, but there are those who, through training, are able to harness their chi to, do great things. And for me, that was an important change that I wanted to see in D&D. I wanted something that, I wanted to see a depiction of chi that wasn't just like, hey, here's a thing that you could fight with. Here is a thing that, potentially
you can
weave
charge up to do a special kick.
Well, no, not even, I didn't want just that. I wanted like I wanted to write that it had medicinal properties because I wanted people to think about their stories and think, well, maybe, when my monk is being healed, or if I'm a monk and I multiclass into a cleric, maybe when I multiclass into a cleric, it doesn't have to be about a god, and maybe this is about chi manipulation. Maybe I'm healing people through, well, think
You're
about
just
it
going
this
to
way.
be a monk that's more like a medic now.
Yeah, or like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Katara learns how to heal with waterbending.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe I'm a monk, and I pick the elemental path, but I also want to heal, and I take levels in cleric. But what does it look like when I heal? Am I just like this monk who's wearing like all these holy symbols, or am I a monk who uses my elemental abilities to heal someone? And that's kind of, the new lore that I kind of wrote into the game will enable you to do that from a narrative perspective. So I'm most proud of that. And that is the one thing that I'm happy that I got to do with this.
It's canon now.
Yeah, it's canon now.
It's part of Dungeons and Dragons. I do want to ask, it was interesting. You mentioned about this, it's very much like 70s and 80s kind of a mystery to it. And certainly if we think about how Asian elements have been used in pop culture, it happened all the goddamn time in the 80s. And, just the things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or through comics and in action movies and all that. And I feel this is obviously from my very sheltered white Irish head space, but that there's in a reaction to trying to respect the material, it becomes an avoidance of the material entirely. I am not Asian, so I cannot include Asian elements in the game I'm running because I don't know it and I don't want to steal it and I don't want to appropriate it. And then that's a whole nother different kind of problem. Do you have any kind of thought on, rather than avoid telling a story in these settings and also not exploit those settings and turn them into a caricature of themselves, like there's got to be a middle ground, right? Where we can play in these games and also not, wreck it in the process for everyone else.
Yeah, you know what? It's really interesting because one of the things that I wanted to do with this adventure was ensure that I created, nuanced villains, portrayals of included information about my own culture, that inspired the game mechanics that you see in D&D. A lot of people will go into these settings or go into, these themes and, immediately lean on tropes or source materials that either weren't written by subject matter experts or people with lived experiences in these culture, as members of this culture. And, I encourage everyone to interact with these stories, play these stories, even if you aren't Asian. But if you're going to, and you want to do this respectfully, consider doing a little bit of extra research. Consider, I would just say consider doing some research. Consider, why you are using certain themes. I'll avoid things like don't do an accent, right? Don't do an accent. But think about, why these things are important. If you don't understand why, why I've gone a certain route with qi or ki and D&D, do some research. Read about traditional Chinese medicine and how qi is in martial arts. Take the extra step in preparing your game. So I wouldn't even, I also want to kind of double back quickly because I know we're running out of time. I'd say that there are also, you mentioned people avoiding this stuff, but there are also a lot of other people who are making this stuff, without this kind of background. And there are people who make this stuff without this kind of background, and there's a hunger for that kind of content. And, that kind of content becomes popular, like Oriental Adventures. And it becomes a standard for what Asians should look like in this world, in this industry. And so I would say, look to games, supplements, products that, were written by Asian designers and feature, Asian themes, if that's what you're looking for, when you're actually, when you wish to engage in that. So that's what I would say. I would say it's twofold. I would say take the extra step, do some research, but also consider who's making the product that you're trying to interact with.
Yeah, where are you consuming that material from? Who's serving it up for you? And if they're coming from a place of respect and understanding, or a place where they're just stealing it, turning it into something else. Yeah. Well, thank you for helping me muddle through my words and figuring things
worries.
out. Daniel, you have gone through such an incredible story that I know you're saying, like, if this is the last thing I do, you'll be happy. And I know it's not going to be the last thing you do. I cannot wait to see what happens next. It's only just begun. And we'll check in again in the I feel like there's going to be another hour and a half of conversation of old.
Yeah, we will see.
I am sure, and I know you can't say one thing. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff you can't talk about that is just out there. And
I got a couple of the things coming out this year.
Yeah, it's just gestating and waiting to see the light of day. And I'm very excited to see what those things are, because the games you make are interesting and engaging. I found Ross Rifles to be such an intriguing look into a side of war that wasn't happening in other games that were also about war. And I feel like that just also comes from the kind of person that you are and that I've come to know, that is introspective and empathetic and all these kinds of things that are make you uncomfortable, to put you on the spot and talk about that. So just very, very excited to see what comes next, and congratulations. I think this is like the first time, other than when you ran by to drop off Ross Rifles safely, to actually congratulate you on the ENnie Award and the success that Asians Represent is seeing, and it's exciting for me to hear what you're planning, like, as a business. Like, it's so much more than just a podcast that you're doing once a month now. Like, it's
that's how you have impact, right?
And it's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, like, letting me use your platform.
Yeah, of course. Well, hey, we've been sitting through this interview now for an hour. I want to know where you're from. How can I keep in tabs with you? What is the best way to follow up with Daniel Kwan so I can be in touch with the things you're making and the things you're involved in, and where you're going? I mean, I'm going to put all the links into the show notes, but no one clicks through no one looks at the show notes.
Nobody does.
Understanding that no one's going to click to the show notes.
We put so much work into them too.
I put headers for the SEOs. I get it all working out, and no one reads them.
No one looks at that. Yeah. If you want to find my Twitter page is a hub for everything that I do. twitter.com/Daniel H. Kwan. So that's Daniel H. KWAN. You'll find, Dundas West Games for Ross Rifles. You'll find my independent design stuff. You'll find Asians Represent all through that page. Check it out.
I will. I do. I see you up there all the time. It's great. And it's also fun to follow you on Twitter because you get involved in some great back and forth conversations, and tabletop dev Twitter is a fun place to watch. Some really interesting ideas and conversations that happen there, where you're all challenging each other in really wonderful ways. So it's good. It's a good time. It's a good time. And I'm looking forward to checking out Candlekeep Mysteries. That's the idea of just doing like one-shot mysteries out of a library, like, that just sounds so cool. It's very exciting.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, I'm going to let you go. You've spent more time with me than you bargained for, so I appreciate that, and I will free you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. How do I exit this thing? Do I just close the tab?
Yeah, you just there's a button right beside your chair, and it'll just drop you out the floor into a little chute like the garbage container, and it'll drop you outside into the street.
Sweet. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much.
Big thanks to Daniel Kwan for spending so much time with me, answering all my questions, and also for just being there for this community and holding the feet to the fire to help make our games just a little bit better each time. Now, I know we joked about that no one reads the show notes, but you really should check out the show notes in this episode. There's a link to all of the things that Daniel is involved in, and you're going to want to click on all of them and subscribe to what he's doing. In the meantime, if you'd like to, you can follow Terrible Warriors on Twitter @Dice Warriors, and we have a Patreon page at patreon.com/Terrible Warriors, where each month we have been playing now Forbidden Lands. It's an ongoing campaign, but don't worry, I'm trying to make it done in a way so that you can jump in at any point throughout the story and participate in the Raven's Purge. We'd love to have you there. And we'd love to have you join our Discord channel and meet some of the fine folks that have been hanging out with us in there. We're not always talking tabletop. Right now, we're breaking down all that cool PS5 VR news. That controller looks pretty nifty. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to the podcast, I don't know how you're listening to us, but I'd really like it if you did. And in the meantime, as we continue to put coal back into the engine and get this ship flying again, leave a review, why don't you, on the platform that you're listening to the show on. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help this show fall into the ear holes of other listeners. Next week, fingers crossed, we're going to be back with another Session 0 as we look into the world of Symbaroum, as we chatted a few weeks ago there with creator Matthias Johnson Haka. We're going to create some characters. We're going to bring them to the table. We're going to talk about this strange and interesting setting of the Dark Forest. And I know you miss us doing those actual play games, and I miss doing that too. It's been over a year now. But stay tuned. I've got new information coming soon. I don't want to tell you too much now and put a curse on the project. But by mid-April, I should have some real fun announcements for you as we get back to rolling dice at our tables. Virtually, of course. So come back next week, why don't you? And until that time where we get to sit around those tables and roll dice together, thank you for listening to the Terrible Warriors. Be good to each other. Bye.